Ladies and gentlemen, drivers, gig workers, and everyone in between, welcome to This Week in Rideshare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Hoffa. It is Friday, November 1st, and this week, Lyft gets fined, Tesla hits a deer, and drivers look to unionize. Legal Rideshare breaks it down. And from Legal Rideshare, I'm joined by the co-founder and lead attorney, Bryant Greening. Bryant, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Jared. Always a pleasure to be back here.
It is. We've been talking about the weather being so nice. It seems it has taken a turn in Chicago. It's finally getting cold.
Here we are in November, and I'm wearing a sweater, and I'm getting stuck. But it is what it is.
Yeah, repping the legal rideshare here myself. So it's finally happening. Still really nice in Chicago though. Sunny. We're hitting fall for sure now.
Yes, absolutely.
With that being said, I know first I do want to give a shout out again to our partners at the Gig Economy podcast. We're doing a little cross promotion with them. Great podcast. They call themselves the infotainment podcast that streams every week at 8 p.m. Eastern. They cover the news in the gig economy world, and they interview gig workers and gig creatives worldwide. So they cover a lot of stuff that we do, current topics, things that affect gig workers, tips, payments, deactivations, accidents. Bryant, you've been on there as well in the past, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I've been on the show talking accidents, injuries, insurance, all the good stuff there. No, it's a great show, very informative, definitely worth checking out and subscribing to.
Yeah. So that being said, we will be heading into our first story here. As we said, Lyft is paying a fine, 2.1 million to be exact. Lyft pays a hefty fine after luring drivers with false earnings claims. This is from TechCrunch. And they reported, quote, Lyft has agreed to a $2.1 million settlement proposed by the FTC over the car hailings company's deceptive earnings claims about how much money drivers could expect to make. As documented in the complaint, Lyft systematically inflated the incomes it advertised to drivers it was attempting to recruit in 2021 and 2022. For instance, in LA, it suggested drivers would be offered up to $43 per hour. Ultimately, it turns out that was about 30% less than they were offering. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Bryant, but to be honest, that seems like a very small fine for what they were doing.
I agree. It's a drop in the bucket. $2 million to a multi-billion-dollar corporation is nothing. And you just think of what they were able to achieve with those deceptive practices. So they're able to give drivers the impression, or potential drivers the impression, that they're going to make real money, that they're going to be able to support themselves, make changes in their life, say, hey, I'm going to leave this other job that I'm doing and go be a Lyft driver because I can make maybe double the money that I'd be making in my other job. Well, once those drivers get on the app and start seeing exactly how the process goes and how the payments are, to walk away with far less not only puts them in a bad position in their, month to month, how am I going to pay my bills, but it's also caused them to change their whole lifestyle and their whole career trajectory in a lot of cases. So, the deception from the beginning is really troubling, that they're luring drivers in to work on the app, luring them in to become rideshare drivers when maybe they wouldn't have made that choice on their own without that promise, and then to pull the rug out from underneath them, pay them far less than they're expecting. I wish that the fine was much more significant, not only because I think Lyft deserves to or should be paying more, that there has to be some sort of retribution, but also as a deterrent. Like, where is the deterrence now if they know the fine is relatively small? They can keep deceiving. They can keep putting these ads out there, bringing more and more drivers in, and then at the end of the day, paying them far less than they're promising.
Yeah, and this isn't an isolated case. I mean, if you read this article here, this was, from all the way from LA to New Jersey. So, and that's just the few cases that FTC caught. So I imagine they were doing this all over the country. And like you said, the fine is so small, they could basically write that off as an advertising fee. So It's kind of crazy that that's all they were fined, and there really is no deterrent for them to stop. It's interesting because this is specifically about Uber. I'm not sure if Uber has also done similar. I feel like we have covered it in the past, but for this specifically, it's Lyft. So Yeah, it says that they were fine, but it doesn't say really outside of that if they can no longer do that, if the fine will increase. I have no idea. But
Right.
it's like you said, I don't. It's not. It doesn't really seem like that was a worthy amount to stop them from doing this.
Yeah, and just very briefly, the deterrence factor isn't there for other companies. That's part of the problem is now when there's other companies in the gig space, whether big or small, they see that it's a slap on the wrist. It's, to bring drivers in on false pretenses, that can help grow a company quickly. Having a big workforce, and if you're not living up to your promises, and there's not really any repercussion for it, other companies may follow this path and template that Lyft has drawn up, and without real consequences to stare down in the future.
Yeah, exactly. That is. I mean, you nailed it. And I have a feeling we're going to see more articles like this. At least FTC just jumped in, and I imagine they're going to keep doing it if these companies keep jumping in and doing the same thing. We're
Right.
going to head to the second story here. This is involving Tesla. So a Tesla using full self driving or FSD hits a deer without ever slowing or stopping. And this is from Jalopnik, and they reported, quote, photos and videos posted by a Twitter user shows the before and after of a deer strike, during which the poster claimed he was using Tesla's full self-driving software. Video shows the car approaching a deer in the road without slowing, and a photo of the front of the car shows the resulting damage, a cracked bumper and a hood that's both dented and shifted almost an inch toward the windshield. The article also goes into detail saying this is a sort of edge case where it's called LIDAR, LIDAR, would have been really helpful. The Tesla's computer vision appears to have missed the light-colored deer against a lighter-colored strip of pavement on the road, but sensors with actual 3D detection capabilities would likely have noticed that object standing in the car's way. So, Brian, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Tesla doing their own thing, the neural networks with the self-driving. Here's an example where this car did not even remotely slow down, and it's all due to the fact that there was no neural network to check on. The deer looked like everything else in the road and just went full steam ahead.
Yeah, it's really scary. It's a really scary story. Obviously sad for the deer, but it could have been a person, and it could have been a situation where the car is just driving, not picking up on its surroundings and not reacting in the way that us human drivers are trained to react when things change on the roadway. So, look, humans are not perfect. We know that very well. There's a lot of car accidents every day and a lot of fatalities every day. But humans understand that the environment changes quickly, and our head is on a swivel, and God forbid somebody steps in front of the vehicle. We know to swerve, we know to slam on the brakes, we know to stop if there is a collision. And what we're seeing here is the autonomous vehicle and the self-driving is just not in the right place to react to these flash circumstances, these moments where lighting is weird, where you can't see exactly what's going on in your surroundings, and it's not reacting appropriately. So, we've said this time and time again that eventually I expect the technology to be there, but it's not ready yet. This is an example of how it's not ready. And, it could have been much more tragic, if that was a person, if that was a child, if that was somebody just trying to cross the street who happened to be wearing a light colored jacket. So, I think this story just highlights the fact that the technology is subpar, the technology is being rushed out, and that the community is in a hazardous place because of it.
Yeah, we covered maybe about a year ago a similar story from Tesla, but the difference then was that was a year ago, and Tesla back then, the car had lost control and just barreled through a median, I believe. Tesla came out a year ago and said, "Look, the car wasn't ready for full self-driving, and this was an experimental feature, and that's where it's at." But we're a year later, and now Tesla's saying, "Hey, those bugs are fixed. It's ready for full self-driving." Clearly it's not, and so that's what's concerning me the most. It's not that this happened and they're saying, hey, we understand this is experimental, we don't assume drivers are going to do this. Just a month ago they're saying we're rolling out cybercabs. We're using this technology that you won't have to drive anymore. So that's what's concerning. Like you said, I just don't think it's ready. especially on the Tesla side. And like they said, if they had the sensors like the other cars do on the Waymo, it would have caught it. And they don't really seem to want to adopt that technology. And I don't think it's going to go well for them.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we can just cross our fingers and hope because these cars are coming. They're hitting our city streets. They're going to be in every city, before we know it. So I hope that the technology improves. I hope they continue to learn from what they're doing. But, if I got to vote, I'd be saying they need to do a lot more to prove that the vehicles are ready to deploy until they do. And it just doesn't really seem like a lot of the governments, a lot of the local entities, or the companies are, putting up those brakes. It seems like they're pushing them out, and they're going to be on our city streets, and we're going to all have to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, 100%. We'll head up into our final story here. South Coast Uber and Lyft drivers are looking to unionize. This is from the Herald News. They reported, quote, question 3 in the upcoming election would decide whether rideshare drivers can unionize in a collective bargaining agreement with companies like Uber or Lyft. One of the drivers said, quote, it's a little unclear about how we would unionize or what would be available to us if we did. Ideologically, I'm with unionization. According to this driver, Uber has reduced the amount of pay per mile a driver pockets for every trip. He says the pay is not like it was before. It didn't matter how close the ride was. Remembering the base pay was near $5 for a 2 to 3 mile ride. He says now you get a ride and they pay you for something for it. Tips haven't gone up to compensate for these deductions. He also said that he used to drive 7 or 8 hours to make $200. Now he drives for 11 or 12 hours to reach that amount. So, Brian, we're kind of seeing this across the board. It seems that drivers, I think this driver really sums up really well. A lot of drivers are interested in unionizing. They just don't know what that means and how much that'll benefit them, but they're open to it. I think that's the message we're seeing.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing is that conditions are getting worse for drivers. It's pay is getting worse. There's all sorts of safety issues. There are lots of ways in which rideshare can improve for the workers involved in it. And those are the ingredients that make unionization ripe. It's when drivers were used to certain conditions way back, used to having solid pay, and over and over and over a period of time, those benefits have decreased and decreased. Drivers just want to be treated fairly. And it doesn't seem like the companies are in a position where they're willing to bargain or make fair concessions. So to bring the drivers together, to have a loud, unionized voice, a labor force that's working together for a common good, they're going to demand better. They're going to demand change. They're going to demand better pay, safer environments, and benefits, anything that you can think of. So when drivers say, I don't know what unionization would look like for us, just imagine the ways in which rideshare is not working for you. That's something that you can advocate to improve through the power of a union. Uber and Lyft, I hate to break it to you guys, they don't care what each individual driver thinks. You can yell and scream and post on social media all you want. They're not really listening. But when all the drivers combine to speak loudly and have some teeth in what they're saying and what they're asking for, it's going to force the companies to treat you better. So that's what unionization can do for you. And that's why it's important to go into these negotiations collectively, loudly, strongly, and demand better.
Yeah, and he really sums up a lot of what we've heard in one little simple paragraph here in the article. I mean, he says it here. He says, tips have not gone up to compensate. We've heard about that in the past. He also said that he has to drive, instead of 7 or 8 hours, he's driving for 11 to 12 to make the same amount of money, which he also heard. And then finally, which isn't added here, but is kind of the underlining theme, is on top of all this, there's not just driver fatigue and physically driving for 12 hours. All the expenses are going up. So he's not making more money on tips. He's not making his usual amount. He's driving more. And kind of the wear and tear on the vehicle and himself has escalated. And it's like you said, Bryant, 1 or 2 drivers protesting or being, saying they're going to the lot and not going to drive, it's not going to do anything. Get thousands of drivers, get a union, it does make a difference. And drivers are seeing that, and I'm glad they're open to it. I think that's really I think you had pointed out in the past that there may be some sort of hybrid, union, non-union, maybe part-time contract, part-time employee sort of hybrid that may be the future of how this works.
Yeah, it's, right now, gig work is still a fairly new concept, at least app-based gig work. It hasn't been around that long. So what we're all trying to figure out is how to make it work for the most number of people, the most number of drivers. And perhaps full-time employment in a traditional sense isn't the right outcome. Perhaps we need some sort of hybrid employee versus independent contractor status where there can be set standards, set benefits, set minimum wages. So everybody knows what they're getting into and the system works fairly for everyone. That's one thing that a union can help flesh out. First of all, what do the drivers want? What's going to work best for that group of workers? And how can we best provide those standards and achieve those goals? So, there's a lot to flesh out here. Working collectively and having all the drivers putting in their input and giving their opinions and fighting for a common good, it's going to make sure that the drivers are protected rather than the companies dictating what the drivers should do or what they receive.
Yeah, exactly. And as we've seen in the end, it ends up being a win-win for everyone, including the passengers and the drivers, and ultimately the company itself. So, I'm curious to see where this goes for these South Coast drivers during question 3. I mean, we're going to know there may be a follow-up to this after the election. So, very interesting to see where it goes. But those are the stories this week. And of course, before we head into the weekend, Bryant, I'll give you the final say.
Yeah, as we head into the weekend, we always remind everyone to contact Legal Rideshare immediately if you've been involved in an accident or injured on the job. We work to help compensate drivers for things like lost wages, pain and suffering, medical bills, any damage that you sustain. We can bring that claim on your behalf and demand compensation for you. Claims don't get better with time, so please contact us immediately. Our website, LegalRideshare.com, is the best way to get in touch with us, find all of our contact information, and we're always ready and available to help.
Yeah, it's just like Brian said, drivers, passengers, victims, anyone's, call us if you have any questions. We're always here to help. This is what we do, and we're happy to assist. But as I like to say, that is the end of this week in Rideshare. See you next week.